Okay, welcome everyone. This is Doug McCall from the International School Health Network. Pleased to welcome folks to this session on extended education in health and personal and social development education. It's part of a fresh working group that we're doing a series of these kinds of informal, small, open web meetings where we have a chance to learn from each other. And this material and these insights will be gathered into a report for the fresh working group. As I said earlier, we've had a technical problem, so I'm going to have to flip between sharing my computer and asking our presenters to tell me when to advance the screen, and then we'll move forward from there, and we'll just deal with that as best we can. But I'm welcoming Ludwig and Gil and Dan, who are our three presenters or discussants today, and then we'll, at the end of their presentation, we'll open it up for discussion, and I would encourage everybody to jump in either by clicking on your mic and using your audio, or by typing into the message box, which is on the left-hand side of your screen. So without further ado, I'm going to just introduce this session by going to the slides and making it into a presentation. Hopefully you're able to see the slides with the full presentation, and this is the title and our presenters today. Welcome everybody to the session. In introducing the fresh working group, you should be on the second page of the slide. You can see that this web meeting is part of a series. We had an excellent session just before Christmas on cross-curriculum issues, teaching health and personal and social development across the curriculum and co-curricular, in competency-based curriculum. So that recording is online on the Fresh website. And the purpose of the Fresh working group on health literacy, life skills, and social inclusion is there. We're supported by a parallel international research network formed in partnership with the World Education Research Association. And Ludwig and Gil are part of a similar working group or research group within WIRA that is working on extended education. So within the Fresh process, we also have another network led by the new network of Deans of Education, and it's a consortium of education and other faculties. That group is working on workforce development related to health and personal and social development. The purpose of these discussions is to inform and influence global initiatives such as the UN goals, and also a UN Commission on Education, which is looking at workforce development issues. So we're hoping to gather knowledge about health and personal and social development in a way that can influence policy as well as develop several research questions. And we're taking a bit of a unique approach because we're trying to look at what can actually be taught, what is actually being taught, and what are the realistic learning objectives that can be developed. So it's not going topic by topic, which is often the way in health and personal and social development education. It's actually trying to look at how much can fit within the school day or in other parts of the school day or within the classroom, and that's a real challenge, as you can imagine. This is the broad scope of learning at school. You can see the very crowded curriculum that is everybody deals with in all countries. And this is from one of the learning metrics task force that is backgrounding some of the UNESCO work. And this is our brief overview. Ludwig will be presenting some of this in more detail, so I'm not going to spend too much time, but you can see we're trying to look at the whole child, and we're looking at a variety of forms of learning and how they can be delivered through different health and personal and social development curricula in the center. So it's quite a wide scope of a process. And so I'm going to hand over to the microphone to Ludwig and ask him to make his remarks. Then Gil, if you could add your comments, and then Dan, yours, and then we'll stop for discussion. And Ludwig, just tell me when you want to advance the slides, and I'll advance them from here.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Ludwig Stecher. I'm professor for empirical educational research at the University of Gießen in Germany. The starting point of our initiative, please skip to the next slide. The starting point of our initiative on extended education is that a lot of learning takes place outside the curricular learning process in the classroom. If you're looking at the international literature about these different learning contexts or learning activities, a lot of different terms are in use. For example, after-school programs, private tutoring, extracurricular activities. You see a lot of the names you will find in the international research literature. And our idea or our perspective was to launch a research network who is dealing with educational research questions concerning all these types of extracurricular or out of school time educational contexts. Would you the next slide? And we use the term extended education for all of these kinds of learning contexts. Maybe we can discuss later if the term extended education is the right one. From my perspective, it is, but in the international context, there are some other terms that are in use, but we use the term extended education. So extended education is all learning contexts outside of school and outside the curricular learning in the classroom. On the next slide, you see that these activities or programs or learning contexts can be divided into different types. On the left side, you see that there are some activities, some learning contexts that are very curriculum or oriented activities. For example, math foster programs in an all-day school, in the extracurricular activities at all-day schools. On the right side, you see there are some activities we call leisure time activities. They are dealing with cooking, dancing, sports, and something like that. And between these two poles, these two aspects, there are curriculum-related activities which are not very strongly oriented at the curriculum, but have some connection to the curriculum. For example, homework assistance or maybe cultural education. I added the aspect or the activity health education. I don't know if it's on the right place in this slide. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is that health education, as I see it, and as we discussed that in Cape Town, is an activity that belongs to the field of extended education. The field of extended education, as you can see in the next slide, has some common features. So it is, from my point of view, it is a very good idea to have an international network to deal with the field of extended education, because there are some common features of this very disparate activities and programs. In most countries, they are not taught by teachers, as it is the case with regard to the curriculum or classroom teaching. Usually, there's no assessment with grades in these activities, and in some countries, the programs are organized not in homogeneous age groups. They're organized in mixed age groups, so children and adolescents of different age can learn from each other, and usually there's a low level of curricular requirements in these activities. And we would say that in these activities, the children and youth have more freedom of choice than school, than that is the case in the school. There's a higher level of participation in these activities. On the next slide, we tried a definition of what extended education is. And for our discussion, the first three aspects, from my point of view, are the most important one. The first one is that all these activities and programs are pedagogically intentionally organized. So they are aiming at something that the pedagogues want to learn, to teach to children or to adolescents. The second aspect is that all these activities try to facilitate learning and educational processes that, and that's the third aspect, are not completely covered by school curriculum-based learning. So as you can see, with regard to the aspects 4, 5, and 6, we, in these aspects, health education is not really included. So we are from this perspective of this definition, we are focusing more on academic achievement and success at school. But from my point of view, one of the outcomes that can be mentioned here is also health education and the aspects you are dealing in your programs and activities with. The most important point is, from my point of view, aspect 1, that these activities are pedagogically intentionally organized. So in some contexts, these activities are called organized activities. From my point of view, this is the most important point because this opens all activities and all programs in the field of extended education to the question of educational effectiveness. Will you go to the next slide? And to the next one. So in our, can you click one more? Can you, yeah, okay. From our point of view, we are using models of effectiveness that are in use, for example, with regard to the curriculum-based learning. The models are usually divided into an outcome perspective on the right side of the model, and the input perspective or the input level, you can see it on the left side with regard to organizational quality, external context, and something like that. And in between, usually there's the process level. And with regard to the activities in the field of extended education, these models have to be enlarged, or the models have to include an additional aspect that usually is not included in the models that are dealing with curriculum-based learning, because in the school the dosage of learning for all the students is quite the same. And in the field of extended education, sorry?
Excuse me, Doug.
Sorry. Yeah.
So Jill Nome is writing into the chat box that he can't see the slides. I don't really know what to do about that.
Okay,
I just wanted to let you know.
Thank you. I'm not able to see both the...
No. This is not correct. I am sorry. Thank you for... No. I said I can see the slides well. I just sent you a short PowerPoint and wrote there to whether you could put it up once we're done with this one. So sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, and
okay,
I'm working with two screens, so I didn't see that. Thanks, Caroline.
Sure.
Okay.
Sorry about that. And thank you, Caroline.
Go ahead, Ludwig.
Shall I continue?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Please do. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. So the main point is that we have to open the usual school effectiveness models with regard to extended education. And one of these central aspects is that we have to take into account that not all of the students participate in activities and programs of extended education. Some of them participate, some of them do not. And so the dosage of learning is very different with regard to the different students or the individual students. So on the next slide, you see that there's research, particularly with a focus on these dosage aspect. For example, Pfister, Simpkins, and Bouvard divide the dosage into absolute attendance, intensity, duration, and broadness of contents. That's these different aspects are dealing with the question which students do what. Oh, sorry, that's not very good English. It's dealing with the question, some students are participating in some programs, some do it for a long time, some do that only for a short time, and some of the students participate in a big variety of different activities, and some participate only in one particular activity like sports or football or something like that. And in the field of extended education, if we discuss the question of effectiveness of programs, we have to take into account that there are different attendance profiles. And on the next slide, you see that, the next one, please. And can you click once more? Okay. The next point that is important in our models with regard to extended education is that we try to give an answer to the question which activities and which programs are effective with regard to specific outcomes. And with regard to this question, can you go to the next slide, please? Our research or our perspective is based on the work of Eckhard Klime. He's a school effectiveness researcher from Germany, and he says, as a result of his research, that there are 3 dimensions of educational quality, and all programs in the field of extended education have to reach these 3 dimensions of effective programs. The first one is the dimension of structure. That means, can you go to the next slide, please? The next one. That there has to be, as Mahoney and colleagues put it, that there have to be appropriate structure in the activities in the field of extended education. So all the activities have to be well structured. That there is a kind of dealing with certain questions. Sorry for that. That there's a thread of learning in these activities, and the students can see that they have to learn the first thing and then the second one, and that the second one is based on the first one. The next point is that these activities have to be supportive with regard to the relationships of between the students and between the teachers or the instructors and the students. There are some other features of effective programs that Mahoney and colleagues mentioned in their work about effective extended education research. So to wrap up my presentation is that the point why, from my point of view, it's a good idea to bring our 2 international research networks together is that you are dealing with the content from my point of view, if I get it right. You are dealing with the content of learning, and we are dealing with the effectiveness of learning. So maybe we can give some research advice with regard to the question how to design activities in the area of health education that are effective with regard to health education. So that's for the moment from me. I hope you could understand all what I wanted to say.
Ludwig, that was very good, and I apologize for having to jump back and forth with the slides, but thank you. That was an excellent presentation. What I'm going to do is try to go to get to my controls and be able to. Here I am. I'm going to stop sharing and ask. Folks, if you would want to just ask questions of Ludwig and comment on his presentation, I'm going to get my email and get Gil's slides in front up on the screen, hopefully, and you hopefully are not going to follow me doing my email at the same time.
This is actually Gil. I mean, maybe we should have one or two questions, but then have a kind of combine the two presentations in questions and answers. And my presentation will be very short, so why don't we just have the questions that are kind of informative rather than like an in-depth discussion?
Yes, please. Yes, sort of questions to clarify. Maybe I'll start with one while I'm opening up your presentation, and just the health education, whether it's just in the classroom or out. The way we're treating it in the Fresh Work Group and in the International Research Network, it's delivered both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So it's both for us, and just as a little caveat, we're trying to look at both health and personal and social development. So it's a bit broader than just what is normally seen as being quote unquote health. So it's a bit broader, but it is definitely the both classroom and non-classroom activities. And maybe just to also look at, I was really taken by your first point about looking to make sure that the pedagogical objectives are clear as being one of the most important points. We're very often in low-resource countries, outside of the classroom, activities are used as the primary learning for health education, health and personal and social development education. And so we're trying to look at having a clearer sense for the learning objectives that could be covering both domains, classroom and non-classroom. And so that may also be helpful for our future discussion. So I'll open it up for other comments and questions. So just click on your mic and say hello. And I'm just going to try to get Gil's slides up on the screen.
Yeah, hello. So this is Caroline. I was quite intrigued about the effort to measure learning outcomes, which obviously we do not only for health education. I mean, at Save the Children, we have a whole research department trying to measure other types of learning outcomes in literacy and math and social-emotional learning. But in terms of health, what we now call health literacy, I think one of the major challenges really is the fact that we don't do health education only for a certain competency that is acquired for that moment in the child's life. So like when you learn multiplication, you know, the outcome is that you can do a very simple arithmetic operation. But when you're talking about health education, you're talking about an effect that maybe is 15 years from the moment that the child is actually learning about the concept. You know, we're talking about nutritional choices, we're talking about sexual and reproductive health, which the child learns but then applies, you know, maybe very much later. And therefore, I think that the research about effectiveness of health literacy teaching or health education in general is so complicated because it involves incredible time spans in which you typically don't have, access to those children anymore. But that's maybe this is a sort of a really in-depth discussion. So maybe you want to go to the next presentation first.
Mm.
Can we save that thought for the second session? Okay, I'm hoping people are now seeing the slides from Gil, and Gil, I do have control of them. I can advance them as you request in your remarks.
Okay, thank you so much. I think this last question, Caroline, I think that's a really important one for us to cover. So I want to be sure that we have enough time for discussion. I want to give you, first of all, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
Perfectly.
I thought that I would share a couple of slides. Actually, this morning I was on a kind of video conference with Norway, where there's an international education conference happening right now. So that's where these slides come from, but I just reduced them for a few minutes, just a few. A little bit of background. I am a clinical and developmental psychologist. I'm on the faculty at Harvard Medical School, so I'm very interested in issues of health, and especially mental health in my case, mental health and socio-emotional learning. I saw that that's a kind of a category that you're also interested in, life skills. And I have, committed myself and my team to focus also on learning environments that are connected to school but are different than school, just because I think that we all, I think, believe in a kind of community-based, larger way of thinking about not only schooling but learning, and kind of a surround sound of learning. And that also means that there's a shift from socialization in the family, which has been obviously very, very central and continues to be. But there's really a sense that because of family work and parental work, participation in the workforce by women, that time is very important to kind of reconsider. And that especially the issues of health, mental health, full service approaches to school are kind of coming of age, and they bridge, I think, our two working groups, both the extended or expanded learning time, which includes not only after school, but summers, before school, and the topics that the school is becoming a center, not only for learning, but also for health, mental health, and other components. So that's why I'm excited to think together how we can bridge things. And I just want to show you like a couple of slides, and I think I can do this in 5 minutes. If we go to the next slide, this is kind of reinforcing what Ludwig said, and I just want to also comment that Ludwig was the co-founder of this whole extended network, the Vera network, and I'm, stepping into very large shoes because Marianne, who couldn't come today, and I are now the kind of co-managers or the coordinators of this network for the next couple of years. And we're meeting in Stockholm, and we're hoping in September that we can kind of work with you or a team of you or have a symposium with you. So I hope we can talk a little bit about this. So here's the American kind of scene on after school, where suddenly there's a lot of transition from after school care to after school education, really, as an educational process. And you can see here from the After School Alliance, which is a kind of lobbying group, but also a research kind of vessel bringing together different people's insights, how after school time is being used. And, in terms of your efforts, I mean, you can see that opportunities for physical activity that's 87% of young people who are in after-school programs are participating in things that have to do with physical health and activity. The one I want to kind of focus on in the few minutes here is STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Because you can see here that 2 out of 3 children enrolled in after-school participate in STEM activities. So this is like a way in which there's a general consensus that after school should be different than school. It shouldn't be just extending the school day by making it longer and doing the same thing as in school, but to give young people new opportunities, but that it also should actually address some of the learning issues, and especially the learning discrepancies between richer parents and families and poorer families, and more opportunities, less opportunities. Okay, next slide. This is just one more way of making, kind of trying to convince you, which I don't think we need to do, how important the extended space really is. What you see here is in orange, the time young people spend in formal learning environments. So at 5 years of age, it's 9.25%. But really, between grade 1 and 12, at least in the US, where the school day is not incredibly short, like in other countries, like in Germany, for example, it's actually shorter if you don't go to a full day school. It's 18.5%. So all the blue area there shows the time that students and children do not spend in formal education. And you can see it goes down as you go all the way up to graduate school. So that really requires us to think about, especially when it comes to things like health and mental health and other kind of things that young people need to learn, including culture and their own traditions in their countries, that there's a lot of possibility there to make kind of this space educational. And just so I'm also clear, I'm not suggesting, and we're not suggesting, the Vera group is not suggesting that one should shift out of school all the non-cognitive issues and put them in after school, like arts and sports. In the contrary, we believe there's a lot of need for that also in the school day, as there is also in the after-school hours to have academic involvement, but it just should be more playful and explorational and enriching than it is during the more structured, high-stakes time during school. Okay, next. So what I want to show you in the next 3 minutes, I know it's a long 5 minutes, but I promise I will be done in a few minutes. This is just to give you a sense of the research and the evidence that connects the academic with what you're so interested in, health and especially life skills. So we are part of large networks and did a study with the Mott Foundation and Noyce Foundation funding in 11 states, 160 informal STEM programs, so after school, which involved 1,600 youth and 148 educators in the states that you see here. Next. And you can see here, this map still shows America without a wall, so I'm very happy about that. But, in future maps, it might look differently. Sorry for this little political side. So here are the assessments that we use, which is program quality, student outcomes, educator beliefs. Next. What I want to show you is that we used NSF-funded project to create an observation scale. So in general, our research and what we want to actually support and what's very strong in the Vera network are people who are looking at the quality of the learning environments. And we have 4 domains, which you see here, and then within each domain, we have different rubrics. Some of them are organizational, but some of them are also very connected to kind of youth development and the kind of interaction and relationships and mentoring we're looking for. Next. So then we have what we call common instruments. And I strongly recommend this approach, which is to take like some basic instruments that get developed that one can use actually across countries and also across different assessments, because otherwise you have all these different evaluators using different measures. So we created this common instrument suite. Continue. You have to now press a whole bunch of times. Doug. Okay. Yeah, just continue pressing. So the blue circles are the domains we study. Based on self-report and educator report, STEM engagement, STEM career interests, STEM career knowledge, STEM activities, but you can really put into that also your own ideas about health. The ones that are really important for our collaboration potentially are the life skills, which are relationships with peers, relationship with adults, critical thinking, perseverance, and identity, learning identity or STEM identity. Okay, so let's moving on. So this takes about 20 minutes. Students fill it out. And here are the two results I want to show you. The first one is when we did the observation across different programs. So all the programs I mentioned and the 1,500 or 1,600 young people, what we find is a pattern of what's working and what's not working. It's a 1 through 4 rating. 4 is ideal, great. 1 is, very bad quality, very kind of insufficient, and it's all very defined, high iterator reliability, etc. And so you can see here that, for example, inquiry, reflection, relevance, youth voice are on the low side. So those are the kind of dimensions that are actually very important for after school, but they tend to be quite low. So is STEM content learning. Now, the reason why this is important is you can use it for PD. You can start really having a language of quality, which is really important for us. It's not just for a study. It's that people get a sense of what really do we consider quality environments. This is now also being used in school, so it doesn't have to be just used out of school. And the last slide I want to show you. One more. Actually, no, it's one more slide after this one. No, just go back one second. This is actually giving you a sense where I want to point your attention to is really the lower bars, not the higher bars. This is where, when you ask young people, have you changed in the course of the programming, you get these results. So 78% of students say their STEM engagement has gone up, and 80% say their STEM career knowledge has gone up. But what's really important here is that you can also measure the life skills, and we have many more. I'm just kind of looking here at 4, which we used for this particular study, that 72% of the youngsters, the young people which are between grade 4 and grade 8, so late elementary, early middle school, is that their critical thinking, their perseverance has gone up. And it also shows you that they're not like saying everything goes up, but they're also thinking relationships with peers, for example, go up less than other elements that are important. So you can use this for quality improvement, but also for evaluation. And now the last slide is one that I want. Yeah, that's actually the most important one. So I left that till the end. There is very little evidence that strong learning environments actually produce better outcomes. And this is especially in the after-school time. In the schools, it's a little better, the research, but in the out-of-school time, there's very little. And in STEM, there has been nothing. So what you see here is that when you divide up the sample into high quality, medium quality, and low quality, based on these observations that I showed you before, that you can, and you take the kind of dimensions of outcomes like STEM interests, STEM career, etc. There's statistically significant difference between what the young people are saying they're learning and what the quality of the program is. So orange or red is least quality, blue is most quality. And you can see the trend is very clear. I'm not going to show you, because of time, the same results or the similar results with the life skills and the socio-emotional learning elements, but the trends are exactly the same and they're all statistically significant as well. So this gives you a sense of how we're thinking about some of the research, how we want to span evaluation and research. We don't want to make the distinction too strong, and how we want to give the VERA kind of initiative, this is only one of many different research projects, a certain kind of direction, and how, and that's the last point here, how I believe that what happens in the after school directly links to what you're doing around health and socio-emotional and life skills, and I'm very excited about collaborative opportunities.
Thank you, Gil. Dan, I'm going to ask you to add a couple of comments as a start to our conversation, and then we'll open it up for others to make comments or ask questions. Dan?
Yeah, thank you. And actually, I'm going to make very, very few comments because I think that I'm particularly interested in coming back to Carolyn's observation and want to have plenty of time to discuss the actual content that's been presented here. I saw my role as being more of a discussant, and I think we'll get more value from talking with each other than listening to me. But I think that's one of the key things that Carolyn's observation talked about was the long-term impact of the work that we do, and that years down the line we may see the results of a lot of the work that we've done in health promotion and social development, and trying to make that link and identify the mechanisms between what we do in education, both inside the school formally and outside the school in this extended time that we're talking about, and long-term outcomes is quite challenging. And I think that's part of the work that the IRN needs to be focusing on when it thinks about its research network or research agenda is, what are the mechanisms for these relationships? We know the relationship is there, but how you actually document that in an ongoing sense is one of the challenges. One of the things a couple of other thoughts that really occurred to me as we were going through is the definition of health promotion and social development, and in particular the way health gets seen as typically physical health, and that physical health gets seen as fitness when we talk about these extended opportunities, and how we bring that back to broaden the idea and our understanding of health as physical health, mental health, intellectual health, social health, and a much more broad consideration of health as a value. And so one of the things that we focus on is health curriculum and health content, but we also need to be thinking about health as a value and health as a set of dispositions and behaviors and beliefs, as well as specific knowledge. All that dumped into the conversation, I'd prefer now to just kind of turn it back to the participants and have us engage in a broader conversation around health promotion and social development, and these two presentations that looked at the role of extended education in as a framework for content, but also as a framework for skills and dispositions delivery.
Great.
So thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much for both Gil and Ludwig. Thank you very much for the comments, and we'll work towards for the next 10 or 15 minutes. We've been rather flexible about time. Let's finish this conversation properly. We normally go for about an hour, but in the last few we've gone on to another 10 or 15 minutes afterwards. If people need to drop off to go to other meetings, that's fine. But Carolyn, do you want to just reiterate your comment and elaborate, and then we'll open it up for discussion?
Sure. So, well, maybe in such an academic circle as you guys all are, I need to say that I'm totally on the other hand. So I'm a public health practitioner for the last 30 years, and basically accompanying programs that specifically in terms of school health that promote health both within the classroom as well as in that extended time outside of the classroom in a variety of settings, but basically in low-income countries. And so when you guys talk about a classroom, I'm now dealing with programs in a country where they don't have classrooms, they just have sort of a tent. But so just to give you an idea of like where where my comments are coming from. So when we, I think that, like, if we look back at about 30 years ago, there've been great works of health promotion through and in schools. My main problem with those was that I have felt a lot of times that school children were in a way used for more pressing problems of health in the community. So school children were taught that their little brothers and sisters needed vaccination, or school children were taught that their mothers should go and get a pap smear. And I've always kind of like fought against a little bit this kind of content, because I said, well, you know, that's nice and it's important, but it doesn't really affect that child for them now. So we need to focus first on things that are relevant to the child's life. So that is, you know, hygiene behavior, nutrition choices if they can make them, road safety, you know, things that impact their own lives. And that is a still ongoing discussion, because a lot of people say, oh, but it's great, you know, teach these kids to eliminate the dengue, the mosquito reservoirs in their communities. That is also great, and it impacts their own life, but it also impacts the life of their families. But then when you go on into maternal or baby child health issues, I think you're sort of like using the child for a health impact that is not directly related to their own life. And so that's the background for saying, well, when we evaluate what we're doing in health education, we can evaluate, you know, knowledge gains. Sometimes we can evaluate some attitudes and some practices, but the main big topics are long-term, as you all are aware of, talking about, you know, issues that are more in the field of life skills. Yeah, that was the point. So just to maybe add to that as Save the Children, we are working on a specific measurement instrument that looks at school participation, stress, and self-efficacy as domains of puberty education related to menstruation. So we know that young girls' school participation goes down, stress goes up, and self-efficacy goes down when they start with, menstruating. And we're trying to measure that in terms of whether puberty education is actually effective in reducing these negative outcomes. Yeah, just opening it up to the discussion. Sorry, maybe that was such a long talk, so feel free to just point out one thing.
No, I think that was one of the great that illustrated some of the challenges quite well in how we conceptualize this, and I'm particularly struck by the last point that you made, which is both incredibly important, and shows the incredible impact of work in this area, but also highlights the fact that there's so much that we tend to lump in with health promotion and social development, and it's a challenge to try to conceptualize how we do all of this all at the same time. And I think you've hit it on the head when you think about the multiple actors and the multiple purposes and the multiple agendas there that are sometimes helpful and sometimes not so helpful. But bringing it back to that last example you used, incredibly important when we talk about these specific initiatives.
Thanks, Don. Further comments?
If I could jump in, good morning, everybody. My name's Mary Gwyn Delaney. I'm the Regional Advisor for Education for Health and Wellbeing in the Regional UNESCO Office for Latin America and the Caribbean. And I'm really happy to be able to join this conversation in this working group. In general, I hope, because I'm very interested in a lot of the issues that I see that are the topics of these discussions. And without having much time to get into the reviewing all the fascinating research that has gone on, and it's clear that you were doing. I am a self-declared fan of the concept of health literacy as a learning outcome. It's sort of my hobby. It's been a hobby for the last couple of years because we really have some significant evaluation issues, as I think Hillary also mentioned earlier, with sexuality education, which is one of the issues that we worked very much on, and also nutrition education, which is a relatively new area that we've been working on with the Food and Agriculture Organization here, especially trying to link the quality of content of nutrition education with the school feeding programs that they're so very active in. I think I would just say I'm a big fan of lumping together a lot of these issues, but of course it gets unmanageable very quickly, and that's one of the reasons why health literacy, hopefully that is not just a new label for an old bottle of wine for health promotion within a school setting. I think we could really make it go a lot further. I guess I don't really have a specific comment other than being in agreement with a lot of the things that I've been hearing, and really anxious, well, really happy to see so much potential for applying the effectiveness measurement and all of the process issues together with the content that we can provide it in lots of different issues. If we can come together and ensure the social and emotional learning and the competencies part of it, because I really am convinced that a lot of this is about forming autonomous, informed, responsible people who can make their own decisions about what they eat or who they relate to, how they relate to, whether it's sexual relationships, reduction of violence, gender equity, etc. So thank you for including me, and I hope very much that we can from here contribute some of our experiences. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Marianne. And other comments, suggestions?
Oh, sorry, this is Caroline again. I do have one more comment. I'm actually quite glad about this, the last slide from Gil that's still on the screen, because it shows that, you know, if programs have low quality, the kids learn less. Well, that seems a pretty obvious thing, but it's good that it's shown. But it relates also very much to the issue of costs. And who bears costs. And coming from a implementation in lower income countries, typically, you know, if the curriculum based or classroom based education is still very poor, there's not much point for us to lobby for extracurricular, more extended education initiatives that are publicly funded. But what we can, we need to put these two arguments together. If the program quality is poor, effectiveness is going to be very low, and that relates a little bit to the issues of dosage that Ludwig was referring to earlier about, how many hours do kids actually spend, how many kids actually do get engaged, and how much. And when we lobby for more health education in all kinds of spaces, we also need to think about the effectiveness and the costs.
Thank you, Caroline. I had a comment, and I think it leads well into the nature of the research and development work that needs to be done, and looking forward to the cooperation between the two WERA research networks and and the FRESH working group and as we move forward. And first of all, Gil's presentation, which was looking at STEM, science and technology and math, I think that's what we need to do for health and personal and social development. We need to think about putting those concepts together coherently. It's a very, very broad field, though. As Dan was saying, it's broader than physical health and so on. And so seeking coherence or enabling countries, because it really has to happen at a country level, to find a coherent mix of what they'd like to achieve in health and personal and social development. The FRESH framework and the FRESH partnership advocate strongly that the resources need to be focused on a certain number of priorities out of HPSD, and so that's enabling countries to do that. And then there's a second contradiction that may relate well to the distinction between classroom learning and extended learning. In the working group in FRESH, we're trying to identify or find a pathway to identifying some realistic learning objectives for classroom-based learning that are not looking at long-term health outcomes. Because if you go to the notion of reading, students in school are taught to read, but schools are not held accountable for their reading habits later in life. So what is the parallel for health and personal and social development? What can schools realistically achieve in HPSD education when students are graduating from primary or secondary school? And that's going to be a much more narrow frame than what is often used now, because very often it's topic based and we have nutrition or HIV education or whatever, and they're always looking for optimal outcomes. So we're in the working group, we're trying to work towards a more realistic set of outcomes or outputs that countries can use, and that's a long-term challenge in itself. But at the same time, if you're enabling students to learn more outside of the classroom, and can we combine the two domains in a way that's allowing them to go beyond the kind of learning that goes on in the classroom. As Ludwig said, the learning needs to be different in non-classroom activities. So I think that's really, for me, the takeaway is that we need to find that coherence and enable countries to find that focus. But I have put on the screen the website where this material will be housed and the recording. You can look to both the slides presentations as well as the recording there. And this is that same website, freshpartners.org, is where the working group materials are also housed.
I just wanted, this is Gil Noam again.
Yeah.
This issue of quality and outcomes, you will be amazed how often funders really, first of all, race to outcomes before really looking at quality. And so this idea of making quality improvement a part of research and a central part of research is a strong kind of implementation science element to all this, because we do need, it's not just that there's high and low quality, we need patterns of quality implementation, and through that we define also what our criteria are, and we then study the criteria. So at the end of the day, actually there are a lot of studies that have not been able to find good connections between quality and outcome. So it's also a validation, a cross-validation between the quality measures and the outcome measures. So that's why I think that for you in health, even if it might sound trite, that you have that connection, it will be extremely important for for fundraising and for quality improvement if you can show that also for health. And the final comment here is that we already have spent 10 years on developing the measurement strategies and now have data and norm data for the socio-emotional life skills side of things. So even though this presentation was more on the STEM side, we could actually hit the ground running around some of the issues of of socio-emotional and life skills, if that's where you want to go in terms of measurement and also quality improvement. I would put the research into the whole area of quality improvement as much as just having research results.
I can't agree more, Gil. That's an excellent comment, and we will follow up. Further comments from folks? Ludwig, do you have additional comments?
I'd like to add a little comment on Caroline and your aspects you mentioned. It's about measuring the outcome. In health education, as Caroline correctly said, we try to aim at changes in behavior that are lasting for a long time. And if we want to measure outcomes in this, from this perspective, we have to ask the students, the children, after 10 years or 15 years or 20 years later, about their physical health and about their health behavior. But I think, as you said, Doug, we have to think about what can be learned at school and what can be learned maybe in activities outside of school. And I think that maybe our two international research networks can deal or can work together on the question, are there a kind of forerunner competences that we can foster during childhood or during the early adolescence phase? And are there such forerunner competences that later on lead to health behavior as an adult? So as we do that, for example, in PISA with regard to math or science education, we have forerunner competences in early ages, and maybe we can do something like that together with regard to health education.
Excellent. This sounds like a good start to a long-term conversation and probably leading to research and development projects in the future. And just to, I think we're coming to a close. People are thanking folks for the presentations and then they're going on to different meetings. So I'll take this opportunity to thank Gil and Ludwig and Dan, who's had to leave a little bit earlier, for starting this conversation. We'll begin to, and just to refer to the process here from the FRESH workgroup perspective. These open web meetings are really starts of conversations. The FRESH working group will not have the resources to follow up on the hypotheses and the challenges and the research challenges that are being identified in these conversations, but the research networks that Ludwig and Gil and Dan share will be able to. And so it will take time and resources and funding proposals and so on, but I'm hoping that we're starting to ask the right questions through this process. Caroline mentioned health literacy. If you go to the website page that's on your screen on the left-hand side, you'll see two webinars coming up. Well, one is on health literacy, and so that's it's one of the concepts we're going to be looking at. There are others such as social emotional learning and global citizenship and others that were those paradigms that are often used to look at learning in schools. And so we're going to be asking folks to try to help us narrow the frame as well as look forward to the kinds of ongoing research that needs to be done. And as Gil has said, research to improve quality. Research and data, the purposes of doing that work, data and monitoring and so on, is to improve, not to just to have to report. So I really take that to heart. So we'll be sending out the notice when this is posted. And thank you folks for all participating. And I'm going to just turn off the recording.